That's the target is November 1, and that plan will be ready. And then what I was just mentioning yesterday is that gives you a
Good morning, all. You want your laptop working? Or you can just borrow my power. Bring this meeting to order. Take the roll, please. Here. We will not be doing number 9 on your agenda, which is clarification of the lien and assessment process. A certain person that's going to testify is not going to be here today, so we're going to move that to our August meeting. So clarification of lien and assessment process number 9 will not be dealt with today. We are going to get a report from the DEQ on their working group on EQC. This is just a quick update. We will do the actual report. You'll get it the first November-ish, and we'll deal with EQC at our last meeting in December. So with that, I'll turn it over. Everybody put their cell phones on vibrate or turn them off. Bathroom, drop the door to the right, and I think we're ready to go. Director Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Todd Parfit, Director of the Department of Environmental Quality. Here with me today is Megan Lawley, who's the Chair of the Environmental Quality Council. As you mentioned, the purpose for the discussion today is just to give an update of where the DEQ and the EQC are with following through on the budget footnote and the interim topic discussion. So to start off with, I just wanted to say that the Environmental Quality Council serves a critical role in the process of implementing the Environmental Quality Act and the work that the Department of Environmental Quality does. And just to be clear, the EQC plays a role with most of our programs. The Abandoned Mine Lands Program and the Industrial Siting Division are not part of that discussion because they don't fall within that oversight. So just as a way of a little bit of background and what we're talking about is there was a footnote in the 2018 budget and also an interim topic, and they're essentially the same, which outlined 4 things. First, as you mentioned, we're to come up with a joint report by the EQC and the DEQ by November 1, 2018. And the purpose of that report is to review and make recommendations on the efficiency and adequacy of staffing the council per Wyoming Statute 3511-112D, which states, the director and his staff shall provide the council with meeting facilities, secretarial or clerical assistance, supplies, and such other assistance as the council may require in the performance of its duties. The third thing that we are to do is make recommendations on whether the council could be staffed exclusively by personnel within the DEQ, And I would also say that what we'll be looking at are alternatives of how that staffing could be provided, whether it's the status quo, whether it's DEQ, or whether it's some other alternative. And then lastly, the report is to include recommendations for an annual budget for the council, staffing levels, and any statutory revisions that would be recommended. So in order to fulfill that requirement, we had our first meeting shortly after the legislative session on March 29th and discussed on how we would best move forward with fulfilling this requirement. And we collectively agreed that the best way to approach this was to establish a work group consisting of 3 members of the EQC and 3 members of the DEQ. So the 3 members of the EQC are Dr. David Bagley, Deb Balmer, and John Cora. The 3 members of DEQ are myself, Luke Ash, Administrator for the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division, and Nancy Veer, the Administrator for the Air Quality Division. Since we formed the work group, we've had 3 meetings. The first was really to just identify what the scope and the needs, what information do we need. We met again in April, had done some data collection. We had put out a questionnaire to all of the DEQ administrators as well as all of the council members to get some perspectives there. And then more recently, we met with the EQC staff to get some information from their perspective as well. We provided an update to the full council on May 23rd as to where we were with the process. So as far as next steps, our next steps are the work group will break down and evaluate the data and the information that we've collected and start clarifying what the real needs are of the council. And I do want to point out that currently there are 2 FTE that service the council and the needs of the council. In addition to that, there are some things that it's just more efficient that the DEQ currently provides. So currently we provide all of the human resources support. We provide processing of expenditures and things like that, and also the personnel, the performance or the PMI system, and making sure that all of that is taken care of. So there are some administrative functions that we do provide, but certainly not all of the needs of the council. So the next step will be, after we break down the information, we'll identify the most efficient and appropriate means of providing the identified services, but we'll also have, it's kind of like an alternatives analysis, the way I look at it. And then we'll prepare the recommendations as I described, and that final report will be due by November 1. Now, as we've talked about it, we've viewed this as an opportunity. How do we become more efficient in providing the services to the council, and are there services that the council feels that they need that they're not getting currently? And then are there different ways of providing that services that we should consider? So that's pretty much the summary of where we are. We expect that over the summer and early fall we'll have those serious discussions about how to do that, and then make those recommendations in the report for your consideration in November. And I'd like to turn it over to Megan to see if she has any remarks.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Megan Lally. I'm the chairwoman of the Environmental Quality Council. We've been working closely with, we've been working closely with the Department of Environmental Quality to coordinate and address the demands of the legislature. And we're gonna go through the process that Director Profit just outlined, and at the end of it, I feel like we'll have good recommendations for you.
Okay, is there any questions from the committee? As I said, we'll do this in December, and we'll have your report in your hands by first couple days of November. So is there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to the report. So I think Kyle's going to join you. Mr. Wetland is going to join you at the moment. Thank you for driving up here from Bags, I believe. It's a long ways. And Director Parfit, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for this presentation is, I would call it a discussion and somewhat of an overview of the Land Quality Division and how that division operates. With the handouts that you were provided, the first is the agenda as we've laid out, how we intend to walk through those materials. And we'll pause at the end of each agenda item for any questions that the council may have. And then item number 9, which is the Midas overview, we'll see how we are with time and if there's interest to really get into that. But if we need to save some time, that's where we would propose to do that. So first, just a little bit of overview from my perspective, and then Kyle will also provide a quick overview of the division. But to start with, DEQ's authorities and responsibilities are principally defined in the Wyoming Environmental Quality Act, the Industrial Development Information and Siting Act, and the numerous delegated federal programs that we have through agreements with either U.S. EPA, the Department of Interior, and soon to be the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The agency consists of the Office of the Director and 7 divisions. We're organized around environmental media, so it'd be air quality, water quality, land quality, solid and hazardous waste, industrial siting, abandoned mines, and management services. The authorized headcount for the agency is 265 full-time employees, and that includes 2 at-will contract employees. Our programs serve over 5,000 businesses operating over 30,000 individual facilities throughout the state. Now, if you exclude the abandoned mine land division, and I do that because they're all 100% federally funded, and because it's a large amount, it kind of skews the statistics. If you look at the agency minus AML, we're funded by 50% general funds, 26% federal grants, and 24% fees. And the total budget minus AML is $72 million. Now compare that with the Land Quality Division is 52% general fund and 48% federal. And that doesn't include the NRC program. And that's currently 100% general fund, but we'll switch to 100% fee once we stand up the program.
Director, is this the $72 million, is that inclusive of the Land Quality Division? Is that what you're saying the total budget for the department is, and then minus AML? But then the differences are the percentages of general fund versus federal fund, but the $72 million is inclusive of the Land Quality.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The $72 million is for the agency as a whole, and the Land Quality Division, I believe, is around $9 million of that. And that $9 million would be split 52% general and 48% federal. So the work processes of the agency include permit actions, technical reviews, inspection and compliance, remedial actions, reclamation, bonding, outreach, and program administration. In addition, we review and comment on federal regulations. We engage in the federal NEPA process, as roughly 50% of the surface is owned by the federal government. And we respond to spills and complaints. We receive and review public comments, and we address public record requests. Inside each division are programs that are set up to administer specific environmental regulatory requirements, and each program has unique rules, primacy requirements, scientific approaches, and competencies. The Land Quality Division staffing levels currently consist of 41 full-time employees. Compared to 2012, the land quality staffing in 2012 was 48 FTE. So that's about a 15% reduction since 2012.
Go ahead, please.
I guess was on right off the get-go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Parfit, in regards to those 41 full-time employees versus the 48 in 2012, can you attribute that more towards legislative action in the last several years, or has that just been through attrition and not needing to replace those individuals, or can you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. Those reductions in force have been, I shouldn't say it that way because we didn't RIF anybody, but those reductions are principally due to the choices that we had to make to reduce our budget over time. So as you recall, we reduced our budget, well, principally by 12% overall. It's just that several of those positions came from the Land Quality Division that we reduced our workforce by.
Yes, do you have a follow-up?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My microphone hates me a little bit. So, Director, in regards to because of those budget reductions, I'm assuming you've lowered the amount of employees that you have to do the job, but I'm guessing that the regulatory structure that is in place has not been lowered to meet the amount of personnel that you have. So essentially, you're doing the same amount of work with less amount of people, or with a lower amount of people.
Yes, so Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, and that's a good point to make, is that the quality of the services, I don't believe, have diminished. What that has, the result of those reductions in staff have led us to work more diligently at finding efficiencies, and we've done that through what's called Lean Six Sigma processes to basically streamline the permitting processes, if you will, and to invest in, and through the legislature again, to invest in technology. And we've developed a system that's called MIDAS, and we'll talk a little bit about that, time permitting. So are there additional efficiencies that can be gained? Absolutely. That's something that we look at all the time, is how do we provide those services and find efficiencies, and we'll continue to do that.
Director, is that 72 million biennium or annual?
I got to think about that. I believe that, Mr. Chairman, that is biennium.
Okay, thank you.
We'd be okay with going annual.
Sure you will be.
And so the breakout of the 41 FTE, we have four offices. We have the office in Cheyenne, we have Casper Field Office, Sheridan, and Lander. 20 of the FTE are in Cheyenne, and these are the land quality staff. 14 are in Sheridan, and 7 are in Lander. And then we have no FTE for land quality in the Casper office currently. Now, the last thing I'd like to talk about is retirements. And this has been a big issue for the agency here in the last 5 years. We've had 55 retirements. That accounts to, when you total it up, about 1,200 years of experience that has left the agency in the last 5 years. Of those 55, retirements, 18 have been in land quality. So over the last 5 years, if you look at those 41 FTE, roughly 44% have retired. In addition to that, we've had another 14 that have left the agency for other reasons, take another job or whatnot. And so if you add those 14 to the 18 that retired, in the last 5 years, we've had a turnover of 60% of our staff, which is pretty significant. Now, I will say that, and I always try to look at it this way, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for those staff that have been there and to move up and take leadership roles. It's an opportunity to bring new staff in with new skill sets as we deal more with technology. So I wouldn't say it's all doom and gloom. It's just that I think there's some opportunities there. The staff that we have are very qualified and do a great job. So, but it is a challenge that we see. We've got another 15 FTE in the agency that are eligible for retirement this year. So it's an aging workforce for sure. With that quick overview and the backdrop on LQD, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Administrator Wentland to give an overview more directed at the Land Quality Division.
Yeah, I just have a question, and always an issue when we looked at a few years ago. We did the Hayes study regarding salaries. Of course, we've had a freeze in positions, freeze in salaries lately, and I do know probably DEQ gets hit maybe the hardest when minerals do pick up and there's a tightening in the workforce. Have you seen much of that the last couple of years, or maybe just a general comment on how much training and how much investment we put in people as a state of Wyoming just to see them poached away or moved away?
Yeah, and that has been a challenge, particularly for professional engineers, professional geologists are more difficult for us to recruit than it is for some other positions, but it has created difficulties, and there is a significant amount of investment that you make in an employee to get them trained up and to a point where when you lose those FTE to other industry or wherever they might go, that is a significant cost to the agency or a lost cost. But it is, we'll see certain positions that will be with the agency for 3 or 4 years, and then they become a very valuable commodity to other industries, and we can't compete from a compensation standpoint.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So the competitions with industry, is there much with other state agencies, or is it mainly to private industry?
Mr. Chairman, it's primarily to private industry. You see some of it within state agencies, but not very much. It happens, but it's infrequent.
So, Director, question for you is, are we competitive in our wages? That's, the Hayes study was pretty much about being market 80%, 90%, 40%, whatever that was to market.
Well, I think right there, Mr. Chairman, if our goal is to pay 90% of market, already we're not competitive. It would be my viewpoint. But yeah, right now it's difficult, and I would not say that we're as competitive with the private industry. But there are trade-offs too. You have to look at the whole compensation package, and we haven't done a full analysis of that. But I would say clearly there are certain positions, particularly in the engineering field, where we're not as competitive as we could be.
Administrator Wetland, please.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, my name is Kyle Wentland. I'm the Administrator of Land Quality. And continuing on and building on a little bit of what the director has already said, Land Quality has spent a significant amount of time restructuring internal workflow since late 2015. We did reorganize the financial assurance, moved it out of Land Quality and into its own workspace, and that now functions as financial assurance for the whole agency. So the agency has provided a leadership role there, and then we've supplied 2 employees out of Land Quality that are shared then throughout the agency for consistency and financial assurance.
So if I can ask Administrator, the financial assurance end is the reclamation bonds or not, or whatever. Okay, that's
Mr.
what you're talking about when you say financial assurance?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And then we've also put a lot of effort and focus in developing the Mine Information Database System, or MIDAS. That is now got a very functional record center. I know you have a PowerPoint on that later, but it has a functional record center and inspection application and correspondence application and workplace templates to standardize our correspondence and get some efficiencies out of there. And we've done those things in order to meet these permitting demand and timelines to the best ability with the staff that we have. The coal program in Land Quality is currently undergoing a Lean Six Sigma review, and because our coal personnel are shared, sometimes coal, non-coal, we'll have a fair bit of overlap in that. I believe we'll learn quite a few things from that exercise. And that lean process is iterative. Just because we go through it once doesn't mean we stop. Every so often we re-review those workflows and see if there's other efficiencies that we gain. Land Quality really has a few key areas. Financial assurance, or the bonding for reclamation liability, is really a cornerstone requirement of the division. Currently, the state holds about $2.7 billion with a B in liability, reclamation liability statewide. The permitting aspect of the division, those permit types range from a very simple one-page LMO document to, that's often an aggregate operation, to a very complex coal permit that can be 50, 60, in some cases 73-inch binders and cover about 53,000 acres. Those are very large actions. And those are generally regulated too under the cooperative agreement with the Office of Surface Mining and Reclamation. So we have an oversight agency and a cooperative agreement that fits into that. The annual reports that we do are another key part of the annual workflow, because those reports come in and then we have an accompanying annual inspection, and that's how we set the bond estimate or adjust the financial assurance liabilities annually. And we do that for the current disturbance and a projection of 1 year of the next operational year. And by doing that with the annual inspection, the annual report verification, we're very confident in our reclamation liability estimates for our operations. We're very comfortable with what those liabilities are and how they're calculated. The field inspections, those tie into this. The frequency of inspection range from monthly for the coal program as required under the cooperative agreement to an annual inspection for the LMO and small mines or less active operations. The permit actions that we do all follow a very similar basic life cycle: a submission of the application, review and approval, submission of the annual report, the field inspections during operations, establishment of the annual bonds and the reclamation compliance, and ultimately the release from that bond and the permit when the operations come to closure and completion. Permitting or amending new areas for those type of approvals, they're a lot more involved because you're adding new lands or new reserves.
Administrator Wentland, if you don't mind, we'd like to ask questions while you go
Yes.
along. Representative Lindholm, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Wetland, really appreciate the overview of bonding, and as you know, that's been a kind of an area of contention for some of these organizations in regards to the turnaround time that they're seeing from your division. So can you explain to me the turnaround time as far as when they actually when DEQ takes receipt of that proof of bond, the turnaround time to the company that is attempting to receive proof that their bond is good, I guess, and that's kind of been an issue in the past where it's kind of been from what I've heard, a little bit of a long turnaround time. And can you explain the process that you need to do as a division for proof of that, and why it could possibly be taking too long in their estimate?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, I'll answer that in a little bit more of a brief fashion, because when we get to the financial assurance overview, I believe it is item 8 in the agenda, I'll add a little more detail to that for you. But in brief answer, it depends on the instrument type. You have cash, you have CD, you have letter of credit, you have surety, you have self-bond. So first we have to determine what that bond instrument is. And if you want to look at the cash option, it typically takes us between 2 and 5 days to turn it to Treasury. Treasury can turn that in 2 to 5 days. Usually the bond amount, even for an LMO, is an amount where there is a 10-day mandatory Federal Reserve hold. You have to make sure the funds are there and they wire transfer, and that basically they're not illicit funds. And it doesn't matter if it's personal business or commercial business, there's a hold on those amounts. So best case, you're a 14-day turnaround. Worst case, you're a 21-day turnaround on a cash instrument.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Wentland, in regards to the 10-day Federal Reserve hold to make sure they're not illicit funds, that would be in regards to cash also?
That's correct.
And that is, follow-up, Mr. Chairman, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Wentland, so we've got a Federal Reserve hold to make sure they're not illicit funds for 10 days. And is that set at a certain amount? And then I guess another question would be, does the Federal Reserve have that rule for every type of bond that they turn in regardless of what type of monetary?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, that's regulated by the federal government and the wire transfer rules of the federal banking system. We don't get to dictate that. Anytime you're looking at a $10,000 and up situation, you're looking at that hold period. And most of our LMOs, if you look at the statutory requirement, it's a $2,000 or $3,000 per acre requirement. You have 10 acres, you're $20,000 instrument. So we hit those marks very consistently. The second thing I would add is it doesn't happen often, but it has happened in the last 6 months where we have had a check returned. So it does happen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We may discuss this further as we get in, but we're talking about it now, and to me, it's been an issue, and I know we've had discussions, especially on something like an LMO, is if a check comes in with that, the check should get processed, credited to the account, and then if the check's not good later, there's recourse under state statute. It's treble damages. I mean, it's 3 times the amount. The whole concept of an LMO is to be a quick turnaround. So I guess my question is that just a rule or procedure, a written rule with DEQ, or is that a practice or procedure, or is this something we should be talking to the Treasurer's office about? What has led us to this process of receiving a check, waiting 2 days for it to clear from your office to the Treasurer's office, then clear out of the Treasurer's office, and then hold 10 days to see if those funds are good? How did that begin, and where do we go to look at the possibility of changing that?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to jump ahead to, because we're on this issue, so let me jump way down in the agenda to try and answer this, and then we'll move back through the agenda. When we,
So, Mr. Chairman, and I think what we want to do is take you to the financial assurance handout, which is number 8 on your agenda. If we're going to have that conversation, because I think that'll help with the understanding.
I'm good with that. You have it in your handout. Is there some handout page that refers to this?
I'm not sure which page they
Or-
labeled that, but it's a table. It's item 8, and it is, going through.
Yeah, the LQD regulations, limited mining operations, could that be where we
Be
are?
after that, Mr. Chairman. Should be financial assurance, coal chapters 11, 20, non-coal chapters 6 and 12.
Do you have a page number for that on your handout?
I do not on my copy, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's, yeah.
Page 18 on the PDF? Thank you. There we go. You got it. Page 1 of 3, it's, if you read your... You'd like to address the...
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is where we break out the different instruments. Let me walk through those and the timeframes, then I'll come back to the co-chairman's question and answer that in one additional line. When we look at the cash options that we've talked about, best case 14 days, worst case 21 days. Certificates of deposit, we're typically looking at 24 days. When we run into issues with them, it's typically due to an inaccurate or incomplete form or required verifications of the issuing institution. Letters of credit are more complicated. They take the longest of the majority of the instruments, and it's typically due to the assignments in the letter of credit. Sureties are about 48 days, and then self-bonding, we have a program in the state right now that's established and is approved by OSM for coal. The non-coal regulations in self-bonding are very similar, and it's currently ratio-driven. When you look at the table, it's on financial ratios off of the balance sheet. We are currently in rulemaking with that particular instrument and looking at moving more toward a credit rating-based system. And also with the letter of credit is addressed in that rulemaking, moving away from a standby letter of credit or letter of credit that does not fund until it's drawn on, and going with a funded letter, fully funded letter.
So is there any LMOs that would be on self-bonding? I mean, I
No,
can't
there-
imagine they are.
No, Mr. Chairman, there are not. So with that in mind, and in addressing that question, I'm going to move down a little further to the suggested recommendations. One of the recommendations that we have is, sorry, we're jumping here, so I got to be, our recommendation 4 is that when you have an LMO, and this would be a guidance change, not a rule, regulation, or statutory change. When you apply for the LMO application, you apply for the maximum amount. If you're a loose rock operation and it's 15 acres, it's $30,000. If you're a drill and blast quarry operation, it would be $45,000. And you just file that ahead or at the time the LMO application is filed. then the 21 days becomes somewhat immaterial because our typical approval time right now is 45, 48 days on an LMO. So what that change would do is it would make sure that as we get efficiencies in the permitting process, that the bonding instruments do not become an impediment or hold up the process down the road. And it would be a choice. It's not mandatory. It would be a choice of the operator to do so.
So if I have this right, Administrator, so for an LMO, they should apply for the maximum amount that they think could be disturbed, and then submit it at the time that they're moving onto the site. It would limit the interference waiting on the bonding. That's what your recommendation is?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct, because if we're looking at 21 days on a cash instrument or 45, 48 days on a surety instrument, our turnaround time on an LMO right now is 45 to 48 days, so it's concurrent.
Yes, Representative Lindholm, don't turn that off, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to leave this thing on. So essentially, what we're saying is the original intent of the LMO is that, I mean, you don't need to wait for prior authorization of the DEQ because LMO is an exception to essentially all other rules when it comes to these limited mining operations. It's not like a small mine permit. It's an exception. Is that generally it, Mr. Wendland?
It's an exception. That's, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, that's correct.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Let me check, so that I answer all the questions here. As far, Mr. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator, on this time frame that you're talking about, I'd ask two questions. To what extent is electronic, transmission used? And also, the 10 days, for example, is that business days or is that consecutive?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Anderson, the 10 days would be business days. And then on the electronics, at this point in time, if you look through that Midas PowerPoint, we are currently taking and scanning in all of the new permit actions, so they're moving through our system on an electronic basis.
Yeah. Is there ever an occasion where people or a company might file for the permit, say, a year or 2 years in advance and wait on the bonding until they were ready to actually mine, so they have their permits in order? Your suggestions in moving the time frame up for the bonding, would that interfere with that sort of an operation where they might have an investment, a bigger investment up front than really necessary?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I'll go back to and hopefully be a little more clear on this for you. It would be an option for the operator at that point to do that up front. If they apply early and want to wait, it's their choice. This recommendation and change would be in guidance, not in rule, reg, or statute. So it's a guidance. You can, and if you want to, and try and help move the process forward, you can use it as an option.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe, so the Midas program, that is the paperless initiative that we funded a few years ago through that process. And so with that, I realize we got a PowerPoint on that, but is that to be to a point in time where you can apply for simple things online or uniform, same way, like we start to, well, I'll just ask those questions for now.
Mr. Chairman, I'll answer, if I could, I will answer that question, and then I think if we go back to our presentation format, a number of these questions will be answered as we move through the list and the agenda. Not to try and circumvent anything or any questions, but I think some of these will get answered through the system. But yes, the answer to your question is yes, and as of right now, just to put some perspective on it, the Record Center and where we're at with the permits, we've got 200,000 pages of documents loaded. It's about a ton of paper that is now off the shelf and in that system, and new permits coming into the system are being scanned and moved through our workflow on the digital platform.
And just to follow up on that, as in terms of funding that, and my memory's bad. It was probably 3 years ago when I was on appropriations, we were looking at that. Has that been fully funded? I mean, does DEQ have what it needs for resources for that program to be fully implemented and move forward? Because I've been in 2 locations now where we went paperless, and it's twice as much work for the first couple of years. It just is. And you got to have the goal in mind that you truly are paperless at some point in time.
Mr. Chairman, that is where we are, is we're in that process of getting, the Record Center was developed first, and that has the storehouse and the database for all of the historical permits and where everything resides. And it's important to be able to query that, especially when we get into bond release actions on large mine operations such as coal. So the division took the approach of developing that Record Center first. Then it developed the inspection app, so the inspections load into the system and now coordinate with the permits. Then the correspondence application was developed so that we now have all the correspondence come in. We have a way to handle digital correspondence. And then we built the library templates for like approval letters so that they're standardized. They're not seeing a different letter from each district. It's now standardized. And we actually have a line in the bottom for document control for those. And the next step then is to launch the actual application and permitting where you can apply digital. That's the next launch. And then adding a GIS or spatial database component where when you're out, you can pull up on your phone or tablet and say, I'm at this mine, this boundary, you have all the attributes with it. So those are the next 2 pieces. And with those, then comes the viewer or the portals and the training for industry. We have already restructured within the division and hired the position to develop and do those trainings with industry.
And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just add to that, in a broader context. There was probably 5 or 6 years ago, we were asked to come up with a plan to become entirely paperless as an agency. We made that submittal, and we're told to revise it to become substantially paperless because of the cost and the time. So we did that, and the way we approached it was we were taking it in bites because the cost was somewhat prohibitive to do it all in one big bite. Over the last 3 years, we have not asked for additional IT funds due to the budgetary situation. So we do have a number of next steps, and I'm talking agency-wide, that are unfunded, that at some point, when the timing is right, we'll bring those back to continue our efforts to become substantially paperless.
Okay. Does that answer your question, though? Okay. Continue, please. We'll go back to the agenda, I believe.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to just wrap up my overview in closing with just a quick update. The uranium recovery program, or the stand-up of the uranium program, is in a very good position right now. We've hired all the 6 FTE. We've developed the application package. It's hopefully going to the public notice in the Federal Register within the next few weeks. We're still looking at a September, October stand-up approval time or vote by the Commission. We have conducted over 1,800 man-hours of required training for compatibility. We've developed 9 chapters of regulations that are compatible with and the NRC has signed off on. We've revised numerous portions of the guidance documents. And, you know, at this point in time, the project's about 2 years ahead of schedule and approximately $1.5 million under budget. So in the last 2 years, one of the big focuses of the division and division services in the rulemaking has been moving this program through the system.
And with respect to that program, you've found the technical expertise, and I realize part of the appropriation for that was over time to allow you to recruit in the folks that you needed within the agency to handle those duties, and that's going well?
Mr. Chairman, we have recruited excellent people. We actually have at this point one individual that has passed the Certified Health Physics exam, which there's about 100 of those folks in the country. And we're very close to having a second person in a position to qualify for that exam. So, with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd move to the first table in your handout on the minerals mine. And I just make a note that they're listed in alphabetic order. There's no uniqueness to how they're ordered in the list other than alphabetically. And Wyoming's just really unique in its geology and mineral
Administrator
wealth.
Wetland, is this the page 1 of 4 and so forth? I mean, is this the LMO, small mine, regular mine? Is this where we're going?
Mr. Chairman, no, this is page 1 of 1. Right at the beginning.
Got it. Start at the beginning. Yeah, that's a new concept to me.
Ready? Okay. Well, just to get me kind of back on track, I'll backtrack a little bit. Just, you know, our mineral wealth is pretty unique in this state. Wyoming is the #1 producer in coal, uranium, trona, and bentonite. We don't have another surrounding state that has developed these resources into these world-class extraction operations anywhere close to Wyoming. The state currently permits 29 different mineral reserves for extraction, and the more recent potential mineral reserve developments are in rare earth elements and the new proposal on a different methodology for in situ uranium recovery, both of which are up here in this northeastern corner of the state. Aggregate quarry reserves, they're distributed throughout the state, comprise a combination of mineral and surface ownership, and really support the infrastructure for the oil and gas industry, you know, concrete for houses, railroad ballast, etc. And just for a little bit of fun today, if you didn't know what zeolites are, they're microporous aluminosilicate minerals. They're absorbents and catalysts. And leonardite is a mineral that's highly oxidized lignite and is applied to products high in humic acid. It's commonly used as a drilling mud thinner. So just for kicks and giggles there. See if we can get a laugh out of everybody. I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any other questions on the mineral table.
Mr. Chairman, I'm surprised we have agate and opal as mining. Can you tell me about that? And can you tell me the difference between ballast and granite? The mine down there between Laramie and Cheyenne does most of the ballast, but it's all granite. So I'm confused as to what the difference is.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, ballast is typically quarry-driven, and it's crushed with a particular angular component on it, so it will bind for railroad ballast. It grips into itself, so it's a particular rock derivative.
Move your microphone. We're trying to figure out where that noise is coming from.
And then we have the agate and opal reserves are more in the central part of the state, and we have folks that are actively exploring and looking for those. So Mr. Chairman. We'll move on to the next table, which is the rules and regulations. And we established a process of working with our stakeholders to help define areas in the rules and regulations that can be improved. If you look at the table below each chapter, there's when its last revision date was done. You know, we constantly are looking at these rules and regs, and there are improvements that can be made to them, as with any organization. And we also have coal federal rule changes that occur that require changes on the coal side. And the coal rule changes are coordinated with OSM and embedded in state statute and the cooperative agreement. Non-coal rules are driven by state statute to accomplish really three key things: conform with the state statute, ensure orderly development and reclamation, and ensure a reasonable and equitable process for industry across the state. And these rules are typically vetted with our stakeholders and the advisory board and the EQC in order to go through the process. There are several chapters that are undergoing modification right now. Probably the biggest ones and that have gotten the most attentions are Chapter 11 for the ISR regulations for in situ uranium, coal chapters 11 and 20 relating to financial assurance, and non-coal chapters 6 and 12, I believe. So just an idea that, you know, this is something that we're constantly doing. It's iterative. And we'll go into the rule change processes a little bit more in Agenda Item 7 for a little more detail there. And again, as previously noted in the prior table, the uranium stand-up program has been a huge push. That has been a big focus. We've tried to be very responsible with the state funding for that. And additionally, to go with these rules, and it's not in this table, there are 28 guidance documents that we constantly work with industry on to add clarity to these rules. So if you come in with an application, if you look at the guidance document, that will tell you what you need to do to comply with the rule. And we use industry working groups to look at those guidance documents, streamline them and change them, and we are constantly updating those through time. The best example of those guidance documents is Guideline 12. It is the reclamation liability estimate. It's very detailed on how to calculate and how to come up with your liability estimate.
So, yeah.
I'm going to stop there and for questions here.
With respect, is it easy for people to navigate if someone's relatively new to the whole process? So you go to statutes, you look at rules. Is it easy? Do they tie in? Then to go to the guidance? I'm just trying to think. I haven't really been on your website or looked at anything, but is it intuitive and easy for people to get through, to find the information that they need?
Mr. Chairman, I would say that there's a process there that if you look at the rules, and those are on the Secretary of State's page when they're approved. And then if you don't get your answer there and you go to guidance, that's on our website. And if you don't get your answer there, pick up the phone and call us. We're happy to talk to you and help you out. Our door is always open.
Is there a link? I mean, will it say go to compliance documents, such, and then you know to tap on it, or maybe then you have to go to a different website and find the rules and regs or guidance documents, or is it all grouped together, linked?
Mr. Chairman, at this time, those systems do not link. Technology is not provided for that between the Secretary of State's page and their security and ours.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I work in and out, not always land quality, but some kind of your web pages for permits and whatnot. And I want to put out there, it's not intuitive. If you've gone through it a few times, it's pretty straightforward after that. But the first time you pick it up, like everything, takes a little time to figure out. You don't just click one spot to the next, in my opinion.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with Representative Crank. That system's improving as time goes on, but it is far from perfect. We're on page 4, Mr. Chairman. We're going to move to the table of mine types. And the table's organized by mine type. In the horizontal row, we've got LMOs, small mine, and regular mine. Vertical is by permit requirement. And I'm going to focus on the LMOs, but I'll give you a little bit of an overview here first. Currently, the division regulates 780 mine operations, including 32 coal permits. Oversight of those operations requires 780 annual report reviews and 1,120 mine bond and exploration bond release inspections annually. Typically, LQD manages to get to about 93% of the non-coal permits. Some of those are pretty remote. We get a road that washes out or we have an access issue. So there are a few that we occasionally do not get to within the year. And we certainly make those a priority in the subsequent year. But there are some logistical challenges to some of these operations. We achieve 100% of the required coal permit inspection because that's a part of the OSM cooperative agreement requirements. When we look at the LMOs on that first column, when you go through, it's a 15-acre maximum that excludes the access road, typically are an aggregate mineral in nature, and these operations are a one-time 15-acre development. It requires the basic requirements for the LMO exemption are that they have a reclamation liability in place, and that's detailed in row 9. That's set by statute, the 2K for 2004 loose material, 3,000 for drill and blast quarry per acre requirement. Row 12 is a surface and mineral ownership demonstration, mine and rec plan, and the bonding, and then a 30-day notification with landowners within 1 mile of the operation. And that can run concurrent with the permitting action. And the LMOs have no public comment and only require that 30-day notification of the property owners. Right now, we're turning those permits in about 48 days. Yes.
Maybe more of a comment, and I think it's important maybe if you could comment upon the distinction between DEQ's responsibility with respect to LMOs and then land use zoning duties that fall to the counties. And I think there's always some confusion about that, so it'd be good to discuss that from your perspective.
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. The land quality's authority begins and ends at the permit boundary. When we start talking about things like truck traffic and volume of trucks, timing of day, those fall to the county. Once that truck leaves the permit, that ends land quality's authority.
Mr. Chairman? And then also I think with respect to whether a mine can be located in a certain place or not. I mean, you're looking at the environmental issues, but not so much the impact to neighbors, neighborhoods, that type of thing. Could you?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. That falls to the county in their land use plan, whether they have one or not. That is not in our authority or scope of authority.
Representative Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Wentland, I really appreciate the comments on LMOs. One thing that caught me is in regards to a permit for an LMO. The way I currently read 3511-401, there's nothing in there in regards to a permit. The way the statute reads is, I mean, all you've really got to do is once you've notified the owner and leasee of any surface materials, you've got the operator shall notify the Land Quality Division of the Department of Environmental Quality and the Inspector of Mines within the Department of Workforce Services of the locational land to be mined and the postal address of the operator at least 30 days before commencing operations. Can you tell me where we're getting the permit? Is that just through rules?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, there's no permit. It is an exception it is an exception. And if I use the word permit, I apologize. It just is a habit from dealing with over 700 permits that are in the system. But it is an exemption, and the mine and rec plan are important pieces of this because that's how you look at that liability. Is the mine plan a quarry? Is it loose? That defines whether it's the $2,000 or $3,000 per acre minimum. Those are the things that fit into it. It really comes down to if you come in with the application and you have surface and mineral ownership or access, which some of these LMOs have a federal mineral contract, and that complicates things.
Sure.
But if you have that ownership, you put up the bond, you have a mine and reclamation plan, we're going to sign off on and you file your 30-day notification, we're going to sign off on the exemption form.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We may not call it a permit, but that really sounds like a permit. I mean, when we're, essentially the way the statute reads, if you've got XYZ, the way the statute reads, they don't need you to sign off on anything, according to the statute. So that's where I'm confused as to why they would need to seek your signature, which is essentially a permission or permissive. It's a permit.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, maybe this will help clarify that. The administrator signs the bottom of that form, not the director. On the permits, the director countersigns.
Representative, does that answer sort of it? No, it doesn't even come close, huh?
Just one more.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Wentland, I really appreciate it, and Director Parfit. I guess it really doesn't matter who's signing it, right? Because at the end of the day, it might not be considered a permit by your agency because you as the administrator are signing it and not the director. But it's a permissive, you're asking permission to go do this when statute says otherwise. When statute says, as long as you have XYZ in place, and it's an LMO, and you meet all these qualifications, and you've done your due diligence, you don't need to, that's it with the DEQ, as long as you've provided that. Whereas in this situation, we are actually waiting on, what I believe your agency has actually gone above and beyond what an LMO's requirements are by statute. So I believe your agency does have a permit. And you might call it like something else, but if it is a signature waiting before you can take action on your LMO. So do you, I mean, I guess it's not really a question, and it's not a don't you agree.
Because you won't get an agreement out of them, probably. We do have a question here.
Yeah, and I guess my question is statutorily, are you obligated to make sure that the reclamation bonding is done correctly?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
So you can correct me on this, but I'm trying to understand this. So if the bonding is in place, it's the same thing as the signature that Representative Lindholm is so excited about there. Is they still have to sign the bonding.
Still have to
and
sign
so
that, yeah.
Would it matter? I'm trying to
It's all on
understand.
one form now, so,
Okay.
you know.
Still looks a little deer in the headlights look, but we'll move on.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, with that, we'll move on to the small mines. And this is where the difference between the LMO and the small mines come in is Small mines are defined by permitting 10 acres of annual disturbance or 35,000 cubic yards of overburden removal, excluding the access road, until such time the mineral reserve is exhausted. So the LMO is 15 acres one time, that's it. The small mine is 10 acres, 35,000 yards every year for however many years it is. And the bond is established by the annual engineering instrument, not set in statute as the LMO. And the public is provided a lot more engagement with the small mine because these operations exist for typically a much longer period of time. And that's outlined in row 5 and column 2. This type of permit, it's not uncommon for them to last 10 or more years and cover up to several hundred acres over a lifetime of the operation. And they include the locatable minerals of sand, gravel, and bentonite. When we talk about locatables, this gets confusing for some folks. Is locatable, I have to simplify it because I am simple. Those are stake and claim. They're located, somebody's gone out and staked the claim for the locatable. A leasable is an action that is typically like coal, where the mineral is leased. It has some federal component, and it goes through an EIS and some competitive bid process where it's leased. So the operations require development of baseline data and the mine and rec plans. It's because those environmental impacts during the operational life can last for a fairly substantial period of time, and you want to get it back in that reclamation to the post-mine land use. The minerals that are accepted from this type of permit are coal and uranium. Right now, the LQD approval time on these is about 322 days. That's provided there are no major changes to the initial application, and there are no appeals to the final permit decision. Then we move into regular mines. These have no size limitation, no time frame. They typically involve a federal mineral of some component. The largest of these right now covers about 53,000 acres. They're usually leasable minerals. We're about 700 days on an approval time. I will tell you from my 26 years in the coal industry that there are multiple permits required when you get into this type of an action. I had 32 different licenses and permits for coal operation that had to be in place for these type of actions across the different state and federal agencies. And it just takes some time to get through all that. They are not a simple deal. The fastest I was ever able to move a permit through the system with all of the different entities and timing was about 18 months. So, and I have a fair amount of experience with that.
Administrator Wetland, does this include the federal portion of that? So
No.
it's not only state, or that you're talking about just 18 months to do state?
Mr. Chairman, 18 months to do state. When we have a coal action, then the OSM has the opportunity to oversight the state decision, and it comes in as what's called a right of entry action, and they typically conduct now an EA, or an environmental assessment on the state's decision, and that takes another year. In most cases, adds a year to the process. With that, I'll stop and see if there are any more questions on that table.
Questions from the committee? Yes. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a very good overview. Thank you, Administrator. It really helps understand the different size operations. So in your experience, do you ever receive any complaints? And if so, how are they handled? And what sort of volume are you seeing? I mean, I've heard about this concern about the length of time, for example, on the permitting process. So I'm interested in understanding what our process is in place to work to resolve. And as you and I were talking, we interface with the stakeholders and be inclusive in receiving their inputs.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, that's an excellent question, and I've been on both sides of this permitting equation in my professional career. How I will answer that is it's important to engage all of the stakeholders early in the process. And the sooner you do that, the sooner you get to resolution if there are contentious issues. And the process is with the small mine or regular mine, large mine permit, if there is an appeal, it will go to it can be asked for an informal conference on the coal side. If not, it can be then appealed and brought to the Environmental Quality Council. And then it can move, if there's no agreement there, it can move to a district court scenario. So if you do your homework and you engage your stakeholders and you address the issues, when you get through the process, it keeps you from having to go through that appeal process and add additional time to your action.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how do you interface with the stakeholders? What is the process for folks who have concerns to communicate those concerns other than the formal? And what's the volume of those types of concerns?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, the way that those are brought is when the public notice is sent out, we receive comments, and then we address those comments and those concerns in the process of looking at the action. Sometimes we agree with sometimes we don't. Depends on, it's rule and regulation driven. It's that simple. And then, like I said, if we still can't get to agreement, then we move through the appeal process. I would say that in sand and gravel and the aggregates, we're seeing more interaction because of urban sprawl, and those deposits are related more closely or closer in proximity to population now, especially when we talk about non-reactive sand deposits, which are used for ultra-high strength concrete. Those are alluvial deposits. They're typically found along stream beds. So, you get out of town by the creek, everybody wants to have a house there. We're starting to see more and more interactions with those. And we work very diligently to try and work through those issues when they're brought up.
Yes, Director.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to go back to the discussion, if I may, regarding whether it's a permit or not. Obviously, there's going to be some notification to the agency. We have a role to play to ensure that we have adequate bond. But if you look at the provision in the statute, it says limited mining operations authorized under this paragraph are subject to the following. What we're doing is issuing that authorization to ensure that the three items that are required for that authorization are done. If we didn't do it up front, then we go into compliance mode. If we end up in a situation where it wasn't 300 feet away or they didn't make notification. And I think the process that we have in place is an efficient process, and it ensures that the operator doesn't inadvertently stumble along the way. And then that puts us in the position of taking some type of a compliance action.
Representative Lindholm,
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director, for that. However, your agency does go above and beyond enabling legislation in this regard. In your own paperwork, you've got to gather start and end dates for the LMO. That's not required by statute. You've got to have a USGS map of legal description of lands, previous disturbances, and access routes access routes, not enabled. Description of operation, not enabling legislation. Number 8, sworn statement regarding info. A sworn statement, none of that's required. Now, granted, I will agree that surface owner, leasee consent, location of operation, the bond, absolutely, all within enabling legislation. However, in regards to this permit that is not a permit, most of that is not required information by the legislature. So is that required by other regulatory aspects? Are we seeing some federal regulatory aspects there that we need to update our legislation with?
So, Mr. Chairman, the quick answer to that question is no, there is no federal oversight that we have to comply with, so to answer that question. But there are other provisions within the statute, for example, that 30 days before commencing operations, that there's notification to landowners within a mile. In order to know whether or not it's 30 days before commencing of operations, we have to know when they're going to commence operations, I would argue. The end date, because there's a provision that says after the mining operation has ceased or within 30 days after abandonment. So we have to know when they're going to cease so we know when the reclamation requirements are applicable. So, and there may be some things in there that we, can take a closer look at to see if they really fit within the context here. But I think many of them are just trying to get to how do we implement this. The certification or whatever we call that of the signature guaranteeing that this is truthful information and so forth is probably a carryover from federal programs, because that is required with most permits that we issue, is that you're attesting that the information is true and so forth under penalty of law. So.
Yes, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director, thank you for that. And that definitely makes sense in regards to the start and end dates. If you could, and I do appreciate your comment that perhaps you could look into something that has to do with the USGS map, the description of operation, the sworn statement, those types of things, and see if there are some efficiencies that could be made. Because the way I understand it, and the way, as you know, I've been very involved with my constituents on some of the issues with the Land Quality Division. And I will state, though, since we've started down this road, they have been very complimentary in regards to your division, and particularly Air Quality Division, because of some of the efficiencies that were immediately plugged in because of some of the discussions that were had. So very impressed with that. But if we could find some of those efficiencies on this LMO aspect, I think life is much easier for everybody in regards to why these things are needed, and if they're not needed, then let's get rid of them.
Mr. Chairman, I'd say, yeah, I agree. Just one comment on the USGS maps. I think that's probably more for consistency. In my career, I've seen things come in on a paper napkin, and so it's more of, okay, here's a standard format that if we all use that, you know that that's going to be acceptable. And I'm not saying that's happened here, but in my career, I've seen that happen where there's some question about what kind of map do you use and to show the characteristics and features that you want to see. So I think I'm in agreement with you that we can take a look at what those requirements are, and if there's an easier, simpler way to do that, or if they're not serving any purpose, then why are we asking for that? Makes sense.
Further questions from the committee? If not, we'll take a break right now. If everybody would come back at quarter till. That'll be 9:45. Everybody back here, please.
You guys are ahead of the curve. Already got it off.
It shouldn't be that way.
Right, yeah, I got it. But the egress thing, I would like to know if somebody's gonna run, very no trust that they got to run. But that has nothing to do with mine.
Hello, hello, test. And so we're back at, on DQ. At this time, I'd like to recognize Jeff Wasserberger, Senator, who just came in for a cup of coffee and decided to stay with us for a little bit. Certain people recognize him. So thank you for being here. Back to Administrator Wetland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are on page 8 and on the table of surface and mineral ownership. And in the interest of time, I'm going to be a little brief on this table, but it's a complex table. It details the mineral ownerships and surface ownerships that occur in Wyoming under the split estate provisions. If you look at the top left, it's private is the simplest combination, with federal in the bottom right being the most complex. The key points in this table and what to note are that the combination of federal mineral or federal surface, when we get that involved, the requirements just become a lot more complex to navigate. And that's for both the operator and land quality. And when we get into those federal surface or federal mineral, that's when we also get into the NEPA actions that require considerably more time into developing those resources. And a big environmental assessment, impact assessment, you're talking several years in development with a federal agency. So are there any questions on that table?
Representative Byrd?
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I remember not too long ago that permitting process for mines and drilling for oil and gas, our process was much faster than that of the federal government for filling out the appropriate paperwork. Are we still on that track? Do we still set the pace for approval of permits and things like, the EISs and the RMPs, regional management plans, I think. So when those come across your desk in your area, we are fairly expeditious. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Byrd, yes, that is correct. Mr. Chairman, then we're going to go to the next table. I think it's page 11, and it's on the LMOs. We have talked about the majority of this already with the discussion about 401. I'm going to ask if there's any questions on this table. We've really pretty much gone through it.
Any questions, committee? Seeing none. If you'd like to move on.
Mr. Chairman, then the next table is 18. It's the financial assurance overview. I'm only going to make a couple brief comments on this too, because we've gone over the majority of this table. I will state that in the state right now, 98% of the reclamation liability is in coal, uranium, trona, and bentonite. They compose the majority of that. The sand and gravel aggregates are a small portion of the overall $2.7 billion. %.
Senator Anderson.
And 98% is coal, bentonite, and uranium?
Mr. Chairman,
Coal must be a large part of that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, in order of rank, it is coal, uranium, trona, and bentonite.
Question here.
And I guess I should know the answer to this, but I don't. So with respect to when you're on federal land, does Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality hold the bonds for that, or are those bonds held by the federal government?
Mr. Chairman, that's an excellent question, and the bonds are held by the state, calculated by the state, but a portion of that is joint custody to the federal agency for the federal surface.
So, Administrator, is the feds are named on the bond as
Correct.
second?
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, correct, for their portion of the, let's say you have a permit that's 10 acres private, 10 acres federal, they're named for that 10 acres federal.
We still administer everything about it, but they're named for their damages on their property.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And if
Any
there's
further questions from the committee? Seeing none.
With that, I'm going to move past the Midas discussion. You have the presentation on that. And then move on to the last item in the agenda, the suggested changes and some proposed actions.
Question, Representative Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been through the PDF in my binder. I don't see the suggested recommendations. I apologize if I'm looking wrong. I mean,
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, they were not included in your package. We were in development. We were still meeting with the stakeholders on a few of these prior to this committee meeting.
is there
So-
a handout or?
Yeah,
Just
so that's
doing-
what I'm wondering myself. Will you give them back to us like the next meeting or the meeting after or something? Will you give us some kind of suggested changes?
Mr. Chairman, that is our intent, is today we're going to outline them. We are in general agreement with the stakeholders. We will bring you specific changes at the meeting of your choosing.
Does that work for you, Representative Gray? Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chairman, are we good to go? With that and the suggested changes, as I've outlined, we've been working with the different stakeholders, in particular some of the industry associations such as the Wyoming Contractors Association and the Wyoming Mining Association. And we've been looking at first guidance, then rules, and then potential statute. We've talked about 6 items and have general agreement in those 6 items. The first proposal that is on the table is a 5-year renewal term for LMOs. What we have in the state right now is we have a requirement that says if you cease operations, we have to send you to reclamation within 30 days. And we may have an LMO that's only mined 5 of 15 acres or 7 of 15 acres, maybe waiting for another infrastructure type project, highway project, something of that nature. If we hold that for the 5 years, it allows those operations to bid those potential future jobs and hold on to that permit. And then at 5 years, we can also look at the bonding, and if there's been changes, we can update that requirement. So our proposal is to look at that in 3511, 401, following D, probably creating a new E for that 5-year term.
So, Administrator, right now, if you give them the notice in 30 days after they cease operations on this particular project, they have to begin reclamation immediately after that?
Correct.
And so if they bid something 2 years later, they'd have to open up a whole new pit?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
And so so what you're suggesting is that in the future, we'll go to the 5-year, we'll allow them to stay in the condition it's left in for 5 years, up to 5 years?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And then at the 5 years, if there's potential or they have a contract, we'll renew. If they don't, then we go to reclamation.
Representative Laux.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Laux, when operations cease for 30 days, we're supposed to send them to reclamation.
Okay, so there is no time frame. I mean, it's just, the permit isn't for 1 year or 2 years. We're changing it to 5 years to keep it open, right?
Right.
Which seems like good. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, the second item that we've been working with our stakeholders on is the operator response times to permits deficiencies. What we've found is we've done a pretty extensive review on this, and when we have applications that come in, there's two principal causes that we've found that can cause a substantial delay. One is we may have an operator that's in construction season, submits a permit, and then we send a round of deficiencies if there are deficiencies, and then we don't hear back from them for 6, 8, 10 months. So in order to expedite moving permits through the system, we would like to propose a response time or turnaround time from the operator that is the same as the division or regulatory authority turnaround time. That way, if we don't hear back from them, rather than shelving and sitting on that permit, we close it out, we move on to the next one that's active. So we're focusing on permits that are active and actively being sought after. The second item that we found, and this would be our third recommendation, is when we have incomplete or inaccurate, what I'm going to say is a mineral contract. We have someone that comes in that may have a section of their permit that is federal mineral and they haven't defined it, so we don't have a mineral contract in place. Or it's a private owner and we don't have a surface access consent or a surface mineral or a mineral consent with that surface. So our proposal on this one is when the permits come in the door, you have your land work done. And if you do not, we just turn the permit and send it right back to the operator. And we'll move to the next permit that does have the correct land work done. The onus is on the operator and the submitter to have the correct land work. The fourth item we've already covered in the financial assurance with the submission of the bond at the time of application. And then the fifth item we had is, and this one we have to look at and spend a little more time with, but there's some general agreement that we have companies that have LMOs, small mines. We have some companies that have small mines, large mines. The review periods are different. Over time, they've developed that way. Some for coal are set by SMACRA, but we want to see if there's a way to make those days of review consistent so an operator isn't saying if I have an LMO, it's 30 days. If it's a small mine, it's 60 days. If it's a large mine, it's 150 days. So we want to take a look and see if we can streamline or coordinate those days of review to be consistent across the permits. And then the last item, the sixth item we have, and we have not fully vetted this one with the stakeholders yet, is we're looking at the exploration by dozing. We've sheeted it out. Our meetings to date, that is on the next agenda to discuss, but if we have recommendations to that, we'll bring those at the next meeting of your choosing. So we're working.
Can you elaborate on what the issue is on dozing, mining by dozer?
Mr. Chairman, there were some concerns brought up during the last session and with the proposal of the last bill, and we thought it would be worth taking a look at and doing that in cooperation with the stakeholders to see if there are efficiencies there or changes that should be made.
Representative Lindholm.
How'd you know it was me? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I really appreciate that, Mr. Wendland. Thank you for taking a look into the exploration of by dozing. Were you meaning looking into efficiencies specifically towards private land and private landowners being able to have that ability? Or could you elaborate on what your ideas are?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, what we've done to date is sheeted out in a table, and it's coming to discussion with the stakeholders, and we'll work it through the industry group and go from there.
Further questions?
Yeah, thank you. So on this, I have questions on all the proposed changes, and I appreciate you bringing proposed changes or recommendations to us. On the LMOs, So these are typically, again, small aggregate mines that are used for a project, small highway project, those types of things. And as it is right now, if they're idle for 30 days, then there's the obligation to go in and reclaim after that 30 days, which means you could be done in late fall, and then reclamation needs to begin. So you're proposing that we would keep that open for a period of 5 years, so that if another project came along, another section of highway down the road, you just got to think about the full ramifications of that a little bit. If I may, Mr. Co-Chair, response time with respect to the requirements from the operator. You're working a permit, it comes in, something's incomplete or needs to be further vetted out. You're saying that goes back to the operator. Sometimes they're busy or their focus is somewhere else. If they don't get that back within X number of days, then what you're going to do is take that file and just put it to the back of the list.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. We're going to go to the next one that's ready to go.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, that just means they don't have to redo the work they've done. It's just you're going to keep your people busy right now.
Mr. Chairman, they're already busy. It's just we're going to keep them focused on the permits that are ready to move through the workflow.
Okay. And then, Mr. Chairman, I like this. I think I can understand the with respect to the land work being done. I think that's self-explanatory, probably a really good rule to deal with. Okay. So review periods, different time frames. Could you expand upon that? Are you talking about the review periods on that come up on a permit? So once the permit's in place, you're doing inspections and then you're reviewing the permit. What do you mean review periods?
Mr. Chairman, for completeness and technical reviews prior to approval of the permit.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, okay, so that is your review, so the time frame that you're using to issue the permit, or in the case of the LMO, the authorization, whatever we determined that was. How do you bring those, how would you standardize those? Because they are all significantly different in the amount of work and the complexity.
Mr. Chairman, the first thing we'd look at is because the coal regs, we have to marry up to SMACRA. We don't have a choice. So we'll look at those and then see, is there anything that can translate down to the other operations? And if not, then maybe we just leave it as is. But we need to really look and see if there's a way to standardize those. Because it affects both industry personnel and inland quality personnel, because they're jumping around. You may have a coal permit, you finish, and then you go to the small mine. You go, well, what was that day? Okay, I got to look it up. I got to spend time doing that. So if we can standardize that, there's just efficiencies that might be gained there.
Any other questions, committee?
I have lots of.
Oh, okay. We'll just give the microphone to you, and you can just keep after it.
These will be a little higher level. So one of the things we look at is DEQ's mission is to protect the environment. Okay, and we have a State Department because we don't want the EPA involved in it, so the primacy issues. In going through this and preparing for this, did you see anywhere where our regulations are more stringent than are federally required? Any way that I want to say that we then look to the issue of efficiencies within your department? Do you have any of those discussions as you were preparing for today?
Mr. Chairman, we had those discussions, and I'm going to answer that in two parts. The first one is there's always efficiencies that can be looked at, and clearly we're here because we're looking at those efficiencies that we can gain. I do not believe we are more stringent than the federal counterpart at this point in time.
Mr. Chairman, of course, one of the things I was very interested in, we talked about, and you dubbed it the Midas program, but, you know, when, and throughout my brief 8 years as a policymaker, we've had lots of technological initiatives, and some have been successful and some not, and some have continued to be a black hole. What do you see at what point in time where somebody can go online and file, do some of their permit applications that can be done electronically, because there's going to be a huge efficiency achieved with that. It would just be so much easier. And I understand there are costs associated with that, but the benefits are huge to the people of state.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with that latter part of your statement 100%. We believe we're within a year of that launch.
Mr. Chairman, and that's for the land quality division. So we have that in each of the divisions. In air quality, we do have that capability now where permits can be submitted electronically. And that has proven to be a cost savings and a time savings for those applying for those types of permits.
So this may go to either of you, but I think the administrator may be able to answer this. So when you apply, when a large coal mine applies for a permit, we're hoping a new one would open in the next 20 years, but I tend to doubt that. Will you publish their initial, or will you only publish the final on your website? Because the initial will be, during your review, and you'll be changing it constantly, and, tweak this and send this back, and okay, you got this. So there could be a lot of time, 4 years, in which you can get people pretty wound up and no, that wasn't your intention. You'd already sent it back to the mine and said, don't do that. And then they sent, So are you going to put the initial on there, or are you going to put the final permit when you are done?
Mr. Chairman, because there's a couple of phases in there, let me answer this in this way. You have a completeness phase. So when we deem it complete, that's the complete version that would go on. When it's deemed technically complete, that's the technically complete version that would go live.
So the technical completion would go on the website live, or did you say there was a second one prior to that, a completion?
The completeness. There's a checklist. You come in and you get completeness first. Did you check all the boxes? Did you get everything? That would go on. And then we're in technical review. And yes, there may be several iterations of the technical review. Then when it's technically complete, then that version would post.
I think you should consider the completeness check. And that's when you should reconsider or at least review that possibility that would not go online, because at the same, you could get people rattled, thinking that this, and no, you've already sent it back to the mine and they're going to change that. So think about which version you want to put online before, the application at the time you're done with it would be the best, I think.
Mr. Chairman, we certainly will take that into serious consideration, those comments, and evaluate that. Those are good comments. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wendland, can you speak to, in regards to the working group that you have put together, is there discussion about a reclamation plan in regards to landowner reclamation plans, or consent from the landowner in the regards that in some situations the landowner may not want certain aspects put back to their land when they could have brome and timothy and an alfalfa grass put back, something that's beneficial to the landowner also, and they can use it for such as agriculture production?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Lindholm, the way we work we're an invited guest to that working group. We let them drive the agenda.
Just a follow-up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, duly noted, and hopefully, I'm guessing some of those working group members are in the room, so hopefully that's as important to them as it is to my constituents and myself. Thank you.
That was a great deflection, by the way. it should be in the initial reclamation or authorization for an LMO.
Mr. Chairman, I would have one final comment, and maybe this addresses a little bit of one of the co-chairman's comments or questions. Just in short, really what we had in these recommendations, we're looking at 2 potential statutory changes, 2 rule changes, and 1 guidance change, just for a quick summary.
Further questions? You have more for us? You seem to have covered your agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I'm closed out.
Is there further questions from the committee before we have, yes, Representative Crank?
Yes, if I may have a couple of questions on reclamation and bonding. What's the running record on how much bonding have you had to call in on, and what has the state spent on doing that? There's been a lot of discussion on, people going bankrupt and, the state's going to have to pick up all this. What has actually happened with that? What has the state actually been out on that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crank, post-SMACRA, we've not had a coal forfeiture. What we have seen in forfeitures typically are these small mine, LMO, mom and pop that go under. Those are the bonds we call. And we typically have the resources to do the contract third-party reclamation for those sites.
Representative Crank?
So I guess one of those, would you agree it's been pretty much minimal compared to the total dollar value set up out there?
Mr. Chairman, that is, and Representative Crank, that is correct.
Okay, and then Mr. Chairman, if I may, have a
Yes,
completely different issue, maybe not related here, but I would like to thank the 2 chairmen and the director. Over the past couple of weeks, I've had a couple of email chains back and forth on, and not necessarily related to land quality, but on some DEQ permits and some stuff I think that the legislature kind of got started, and maybe we tripped everybody up a little bit. But when you put in for permits for specifically, let's say a permit to construct for water quality, put in a pipeline or whatnot, there's a new item that's been added to the back of the forms on page 4 that basically has to do with access to the site and being able to check for environmental issues. I would like to thank the director for kind of looking at that. And if I haven't looked at the statute on it, so my apologies for that. But I think any suggestions we can get for these folks and ourselves to change it. We've got a problem that exists where we're telling these guys they have to get access, but I think it's stepped over the line, and now we're kind of pushing on some property rights that we may get some people in trouble with. So thank you for indulging me previously.
You're welcome, Representative Crank, but also I think the department answered fairly quickly, and we kind of shot ourselves in the foot with that one ourselves, so we'll get that corrected. Other questions from the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think on that same issue, we, with the bentonite mines in the Bighorn Basin, time flies by, 18 months ago or so, it was a similar issue with respect to the department, and I know you were acting on legal advice from the AG's office, but was that you didn't have the right or the ability to go across private easements to go and inspect those particular mines. And so, the comment, you're now an invited guest, I would assume an easement that says, a blanket statement for mining operations or bentonite mining operations, as the case was there, is sufficient. I mean, we have regulation, and I'm just wondering, have you run into that anymore, or has that issue been resolved, or is that still cropping up from time to time?
Mr. Chairman, I think largely it's been resolved. There are occasions where we do have issues that do come up. But I think by and large, we've worked through some of the more complicated issues that we've experienced in terms of having access to do inspections for bond release or just inspections in general that are required.
Thank you, Director, and I just want to make sure the department doesn't need to be actually named on the access. It could say for mining reasons. Would that allow you to cross, or do you want your department named on that access agreement?
So, Mr. Chairman, to address that, as Representative Greer mentioned, adding language to some of these agreements that say or invited guest, so that if an operator has access and then they invite, whether it's the DEQ or some other entity that they, like a consultant or whatnot, that works for us. We did develop a policy back in 2016, I believe it was, that addresses it for the staff because there was concern, because trespass issues are a criminal offense with a minimum of 10 days imprisonment. So there was some very great concern by staff of not running afoul of the trespass laws. And so we developed a policy to help guide the staff on how we should manage that. If they do run into difficulty getting access, then we just run that up the chain to try to get resolution on that. We've had instances where we've been asked to pay a fee to do an inspection, which obviously we're not going to do. But we've been able to work around most of the issues and find a path forward. We've worked with the Mining Association, particularly with the bentonite issue and concerns there, to find a workable path forward.
All right. And do you have anything else for us, Director?
Mr. Chairman, no, we're done unless you have additional questions.
Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll let you guys take a break, and we'll call up Mr. Obermueller. And Pete, could you give us the counties and the zoning and the mining as the counties see it, I guess, from the county's point of view?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Pete Obermueller, Executive Director of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Mr. Chairman, I was invited to talk a little bit about the county's role in this, particularly in the LMOs. Counties do have a bit of a role here, much smaller, obviously, than the DEQs, but it's probably important to know, given this whole overview of the regulatory environment, particularly for limited mining operations, what the county's role is there. So quickly, Mr. Chairman, I'll talk about a couple of those or about that role. Mr. Chairman, it's 18.5201 is the statutory reference for the county's authority, and it's pretty basic, Mr. Chairman. It says, to promote the public health, safety, morals, general welfare of the county, the commissioners may regulate and restrict the location and use of buildings and structures and the use, condition of use, or occupancy of lands for residence, recreation, agriculture, industry, commerce, public use, and other purposes. So it's permissive. It's the first thing to note, Mr. Chairman. The counties may. And the way that works in the 23 counties is sort of at various levels of engagement. So first off, in another part of the statute, I don't have the reference, the statute does require every single county to have a comprehensive land use plan. But the statute is very silent on what that looks like at that very basic level. So I'm going to talk about some of these layers. All 23 counties do have a land use plan. And then you step that up into this 18.5201 and 202, and the statute allows for counties to step that up by appointing an official land use planning commission. All 23 counties have taken that step. That's also permissive, but and so you wouldn't necessarily have to do that, but all 23 counties do have an official a land use planning commission. Then there's the Z word, zoning, after that, and that is probably the highest step. And that, again, is permissive. Zoning is a regulatory tool. It's not the only tool. You can use other regulatory tools in this space, but zoning is is probably the highest level allowed by statute for counties. 14 counties currently employ zoning in some form or fashion, and the others have no zoning requirements. So some counties, Mr. Chairman, Laramie County, and some others have small zoning areas specifically surrounding municipalities. Laramie County zones within 5 miles of Cheyenne's boundaries. Some counties are zoned county-wide. Natrona County zones county-wide. Albany County zones county-wide, and some others. Converse has no zoning. Washakie has no zoning, or they do not employ zoning as a tool. I mention that simply as an overview of sort of where the counties are at with respect to land use planning and regulation. As it relates to the discussion of the director and what you're talking about this morning, it's important to know that counties do not have authority under any circumstances, zoning or otherwise, to limit mining operations. The statute is clear that counties cannot take any steps to prevent the extraction of or production of mineral resources in or under any land subject thereto. So when you're talking about coal or uranium or oil and gas, we have no regulatory authority in that space. For the mine itself, the operation itself, we'll come back to that. However, the Wyoming Supreme Court did rule that sand, gravel, those sorts of things are not considered minerals. So we do have some authority with respect to sand and gravel. And you can use zoning in order to prevent the mining of sand and gravel and those sorts of things. Outside of the unincorporated areas outside of zoning, there are regulatory tools that can be used and that are used. So when the administrator was talking about there's no notification requirements, these small LMOs outside in the unincorporated areas do have to go to the county. And the first step is the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then it goes to the Board of County Commissioners. There's various levels there that that an operator would have to comply with. They're, in my opinion, they're not onerous, but those meetings are open. Those are open meetings, and so in terms of a public notification, even an LMO can't really move forward without notification. The notification comes from the county's open meeting requirements. Coming back, Mr. Chairman, really quick to what I said about we don't have the ability to regulate the mine itself. The administrator was clear, and he's right, that their authority stops at the mine operation. Obviously, you have to access the mine operation. Usually that's by county roads. And so there are some permits, in fact, hesitate to use that word this morning, but there are some permits related to accessing these mines, particularly when you're talking about very large overweight trucks. And by overweight, I mean overweight by YDOT standards, not by any sort of other standards set by the county, or very, very high volume, which, as you all know, is very damaging to county roads. So usually there can be some permit requirements for overweight trucks and those sorts of things. Those are less of an issue for LMOs. That can happen actually in the larger mines and oil and gas operations. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the general overview. I don't want to belabor the point and bore everybody to death. I think the point, Mr. Chairman, that I wanted to make is that as it relates to LMOs and all of these regulations are really they're very locally based. They depend on the population in the county and their representatives to decide if they want to have some rules in place to monitor or to restrict in some way or deal with these limited mining operations, even if they're small. Some places have taken some steps to do that, and lots of places have not. And I think is an important point that may have slid by that the administrator said is that these small mines, because of growth in population, not in the last year or so, but as Wyoming grows, some of these small mines get closer and closer to residential areas, or vice versa. Residential areas push out to some of these small mines. the Laramie County members are very aware of a controversial one in Laramie County. In my work, Mr. Chairman, in sitting in county commissioner meetings, these are some of the most difficult things that the commissioners have to do. It's taking meritorious arguments between neighbors and refereeing those. And it's not fun, but it is what the statute and the Constitution has set up the counties to do, is to be that referee. And they know that when they get into it. So those things are going to happen more and more, I think. And I'm not asking you to make any changes about that. It's just something for you to be aware of, that two neighbors may disagree about their private property use, and it ends up the county has to be the referee. Mr. Chairman, that's the end of my comments. Be happy to take questions. I hope that met your expectation.
Committee, do you have questions? Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, one of the recommendations was to move the LMO reclamation out to 5 years after ceasing mining. You're more involved in LMOs than most, so do you think that's a reasonable amount of time?
Mr. Chairman. Senator Anderson, thank you. I have to just parrot what the co-chairman said about that. I need some time to think about the ramifications of that. I don't know if that's too long or not. I'm going to have to think about it. That's the first I heard of it this morning, so I really have to think and ask my members what they think about that. I know, I'm sorry, Mr.
He wants an immediate answer.
I wish I could. I really honestly don't. I don't know.
So Representative Lindholm, do you have a question? Really? Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Anything else you want to mention, Mr. Obermueller? If not, you've done a good job. Thank you for that education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. Okay, the next thing on the list is, I believe, is just public comment related to the DEQ land quality division in particular. So, Mr. Travis, if you'd like to have a seat. Identify yourselves for the record.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm Travis Detai. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association, and I would hope the committee would indulge me. I'm going to read some prepared remarks and then would stand for questions. Joining me today is Mr. Phil Dinsmore. He is the Director of Environmental Services for the Powder River Basin for Peabody Energy, and Mr. Dinsmore also serves as the Chairman of the Wyoming Mining Association Regulatory Affairs Committee, and I lean on Phil a lot for some of the other technical stuff that we have to deal with in the industry. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate the committee's effort to review the DEQ Land Quality Division. Mining operations are best served by a regulatory climate that is fair, timely, and consistent, and offers a certain degree of certainty to the regulated community. So ongoing efforts to streamline and improve the state regulatory process are of particular importance and value to the state's mining community. We believe that Wyoming's leadership in the early 1970s performed a major service to the citizens of Wyoming through the passage of the Environmental Quality Act of 1973. In the decades since the passage of that legislation, the law has been modified numerous times in a variety of ways. However, the basic regulatory programs, including permitting, inspection, reporting, and enforcement, bear a strong resemblance to the original concepts of the Act. The programs have proven to be adaptable to accommodate changes in our society, our economy, the regulated community, and other state and federal laws. The Environmental Quality Act continues to serve as the backbone for several state primacy programs, and Article 4 of the Act is still recognized as the model for many of the provisions of the Federal Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977, SMCRA. Our purpose for bringing this to your attention today is to emphasize that Wyoming has a robust and resilient program for regulating all mining in the state. That said, there is always room for improvement and adaptation to address change. WMA's membership believes that the industry has and can continue to play a role in this improvement process. Over the course of the past 7 years, and I've mentioned this before this committee before, industry members across the sectors that WMA represents, bentonite, coal, trona, and uranium, have been actively engaged with the Land Quality Division through a series of industry working groups to address regulatory issues at the state level. The working groups were developed on the concept that bringing regulators and the regulated community to the table in an organized process could be an effective way to examine guidelines, rules, and regulations, evaluate what is working and what is not, and find workable solutions. And indeed, the process has been protracted and contentious at times, and agreement has occasionally been long in coming in some cases. But we believe that all parties, would agree that the process has been a model of what we consider a healthy and civil adversarial relationship striving to achieve common goals. And we've had success. The work group concept has put in place the mechanism by which the industry can approach the agency with problems and concerns. It provides a forum to discuss and hash out differences and ultimately find workable solutions, workable regulatory solutions. And here are a couple of examples I'd like to cite. A couple of years ago, regulators with the LQD and the industry sat down and worked together to improve the structure of the bonding guidance that had been based on outmoded models. And the result of this was guidance that more closely reflects accurate equipment costs. Today, bonds are more accurate and what we would consider right-sized. The industry also worked closely with LQD in developing the rules and regulation package for Wyoming's new agreement state program, by which Wyoming will take regulatory primacy of uranium production. As Administrator Wentland mentioned, the stand-up of the program is ahead of schedule and under budget, and this is a real success story for the state of Wyoming. And the legislature had a hand in that as well, and that's going to be good. The point we wish to leave the committee with is that the process of maintaining a streamlined and workable regulatory regimen is an ongoing collaborative process. Is it easy? No. Does everyone always get what they want? Of course not. Does it ever end? Well, we hope not. Because by continuing to work together in a structured atmosphere, we believe that LQD and the mining industry can continue to find reasonable, workable regulatory solutions with the ultimate goals of Wyoming operators being able to produce minerals and jobs and revenue, and the agency being able to carry out its statutory charge under the Environmental Quality Act. Finally, I would also like to point out and recognize the Land Quality Division. They spent many man-hours and time and effort developing and defending the state's position against a number of recent federal actions, including EPA's CERCLA 108B regulation on hard rock mining sureties, EPA's 40 CFR Part 192 rulemaking on groundwater restoration for in situ uranium recovery, and the Office of Surface Mining's ill-conceived stream protection rule. The division's work, without a doubt, contributed to thwarting these efforts, all of which would have had very negative impacts on both the state and the state's mining industry. So in conclusion, the people of Wyoming have come to expect world-class performance in meeting compliance and reclamation obligations from the mining industry. We believe that the state receives this level of performance from the mining industry because the Land Quality Division administers the strongest mining regulatory program of any of the 50 United States. So while we urge you to continue to encourage the agency to look for improvements regularly, we also believe that the Wyoming program is based on a strong and proven foundation. Administrator Wentland has given some recommendations to you, and we don't have anything to add at this time to those recommendations. And with that, I would stand for any questions, and I'll lean on Mr. Dinsmore to answer the more technical ones.
Committee, any questions? Yes.
Mr. Detail, this wasn't an appropriate question for the department, but it is for you. So, I understand, and we deal with sort of the upper level within DEQ, and they've always been very good, answer questions that get us information. But, the constituents we represent, we hear complaints from time to time. We try to be a go-between. Your position is similar. My question is, and what I hear, I don't know if it's true or not, but at the regional offices, are there consistencies in the application of the rules, the guidance, or do your members see anything that's different from one office, say Sheridan versus Lander or Cheyenne?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Greer, that's an excellent question. We have seen inconsistencies. We have the mechanism in place through what I have just described to bring those concerns to the agency. And I think the agency hears those and does what it can to address those. I think there's some personnel issues on that. But we have expressed those concerns, and we have seen those. And I would say we've seen some improvement over the last few years. I would.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that was going to be my question. Has that been a discussion point in your working group? Have you worked for solutions, and have you seen improvement?
Mr. Chairman, yes and yes. Yes.
Representative Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Detaille, thank you for your testimony. It's really appreciated. In regards to some of the testimony that you heard today between the DEQ and some of that discussion that happened between this legislative body and the Land Quality Division, is there any of those aspects that really give your organization heartburn in regards to reclamation or those types of things?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, it all gives us heartburn. It's stuff that you just have to work through, though. And again, the point that I would leave with this committee is you've got to come to the table, and you've got to work through the issues. And if you kind of go through the things where you can change something and solve some problems through the guidelines, through rules, and ultimately through legislation, if you can work through those issues, let's do it. You've got to keep those lines of communication open. We can solve problems try to solve the problems. I'm not sure that answers your question, but maybe we can talk offline about it. But no, you got to work through the issues.
Further questions, committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And hopefully I don't misstate this, but Mr. Wetland had made a comment regarding letters of credit being, and I forget the term he used, but callable or rather than standby, and I might be using those terms incorrectly. And that would be a shift in what we've done. Is that any issue to your members?
You know, with it, I think it is, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to Mr. Dinsmore for that one, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I think the answer really is no. Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Phil Dinsmore. I'm the Regulatory Affairs Committee Chairman for Wyoming Mining Association. And I think that we haven't seen significant concern with that proposed change, but that's kind of a difficult question to answer simply because with 100 or more members of the Wyoming Mining Association, some of the comments get lost in the greater concerns of the proposed rules and financial assurance right now. So I don't think it's a major issue.
So my co-chair and I, we sponsored legislation last year to allow DEQ to accept real estate or real property as collateral for bonds, again, using the correct term. I don't know if that goes into effect till July 1, but I'm just curious how maybe that's helped your members or would help your members, help with the issue, less self-bonding, that type of thing.
Mr. Chairman, again, I think the answer is there has been some benefit from that change. I don't think that you're going to see every member of the Wyoming Mining Association using it, but where the opportunity exists, it's provided that advantage.
Further questions from the committee? Do you have anything more?
No, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today.
Mr. Dinsmore doesn't have anything he'd like to say?
No, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much, both of you. Others that would like to speak from the public? Katie? Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Katie Legursky. I'm the Executive Director for the Wyoming Contractors Association. With me today is Paul Beeson. Mr. Beeson is the Regulatory Compliance Director for Mobile Concrete. Mr. Beeson also serves as the Wyoming Contractors Association Environmental Committee Chairman, and Paul is here to answer all the technical questions regarding any permitting that you guys might have. WCA appreciates the time the committee spent this morning to review the DEQ Land Quality Division. In 2004, the Wyoming Contractors Association and the Wyoming DEQ formed a working group which has met 2 to 4 times per year since then. This partnership promotes greater creativity, spurs innovation, and fosters collaboration between the industry and the regulators. Working together provides opportunities to learn from one another, and it also encourages communication between both parties. My first meeting with the work group was on July 12, 2007. During this meeting, we had 2 agenda items. The first was to review the land quality permitting process to see what flexibility exists to improve the permitting process. The second agenda item was to explore best management practices from industry that could be implemented to address public concerns and unintended consequences of construction projects. After numerous meetings with the Land Quality Division, we were successful in updating the limited mining operations from 10 acres to 15 with the removal of the haul road from the acreage. This major accomplishment was possible because of our ongoing efforts in partnering with one another. Recently, we have formed the Sand and Gravel Work Group to identify areas in the permitting process that could be reviewed, modified, or eliminated to make the regulatory process smoother for everyone. Prior to our first meeting on May 21st, WCA prepared a survey and sent it to 170 sand and gravel operators throughout the state, asking for their feedback on where they would like to see efficiencies. This information was received from the survey, was shared with the work group, and we used that information as a starting point for our discussions with the regulatory agency. Immediately, we found common ground and agreed on a number of items that Administrator Wetland identified earlier this morning. Our next work group meeting is scheduled for August 9th. The 2 agenda items that we had agreed on to address at this time during this meeting was to discuss and analyze the 6-mile Alamo radius and also look at alternatives to obtaining a permit and bonding for exploration of viable sand and gravel resources. Again, WCA appreciates the partnership we have had with DEQ and the Land Quality Division, and we look forward to working with them in the process. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Really?
Sorry.
Okay. Representative Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Legersky, for your testimony. It's awesome. I think it's great that this working group has formed. You spoke specifically towards LMOs and some of those ideas that are being brought forward. I guess I'm interested in hearing more whether or not there is any ideas for the reclamation by the landowner consent, essentially, where you do have landowners out on a agricultural type place that maybe don't want just the random order that normally happens thrown back. Maybe they'd like something else, and if agreed upon by the landowner and those individuals that you represent, would that be something that your organization would support?
Mr. Chairman, that is something that we would be more than happy to take a look at. Right now, we're letting the work group decide on what issues they would like to address first, which ones are more of a priority to them. And from a number of operators up in the Northeast Quarter, their first priority was looking at the exploration and what changes we can make there. So we're doing baby steps as we go along within the process. There are a number of other items we would like to get to, but as of for right now, the priority would be looking at exploration first.
Just a follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to exploration by dozing, are you looking at specifically exploration, or can you, I guess, maybe needle down on the exploration by dozing aspects, landowner consent aspect versus a permission from DEQ if it's privately owned?
Mr. Chairman, we haven't really gotten into a lot of details yet on that. What industry would like to do is meet previously to our meeting with the DEQ Land Quality Division to go into a little more detail on what industry was thinking. Some of the ideas were just to be thrown off right off the bat was looking at maybe doing some sort of general permit, but having requirements depending upon what type of exploration you're going to do, whether you're going to go in and trench, whether you're going to drill, and then set certain guidelines that must be followed, and maybe do that rather than going and obtaining a permit and a bond from DEQ, but working directly with the landowner. Those are ideas that were just thrown out in the beginning. We haven't had an opportunity to sit down and vet it among all the members serving on the work group yet, which is what we plan on doing prior to August 9th.
Got it? Okay, after this meeting, everybody will remember the Alamo.
You used it.
Yeah, I tried, man. Any other questions from the committee? Any other great suggestions from the committee? Anything else you'd like to add? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will ask the same question of your members and the same issues with consistency between the regional offices or any issues that you see on a day-to-day basis, or that your members have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
If you don't mind, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Beeson that deals with that on a regular basis.
Yeah, I'm Paul Beeson, Mobile Concrete, Inc. And Mr. Chairman, yeah, there has been some inconsistencies in regional because of change of personnel. I see it, you quite often from year to year. In the regionals, you'll see a completely different permit manager.
Yeah, and thank you. And then along those lines, in terms of some of the suggested changes with respect to the response time, is that, and I assume that's an overall benefit to your members until one of your members' applications actually gets put back on the back shelf. But is that good policy for your particular members?
Mr. Chairman, we did discuss this at length, and our members do believe that if DEQ has responsibility to get back to them within 45 days, 30 days, then industry must provide the same type of service back to the agency. After all, both the agency and the operator wants that permit to move in a timely fashion, and if it's the operator holding up the permit, then that is definitely on us, not on the agency, because we weren't able to get back to them in a timely manner, and it took us 6, 8, 9 months to get back to them. We understand that there's other permits that are in the process, and we believe those other permits should be forward. So yes, we believe that industry should have their ducks in the row, and industry should be able to get back to the agency within a timely manner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I understand. I think this would have the biggest impact on your members. I mean, the mining association have larger scale plans that they work on. And you're going to do an education with your members so that they understand that if these time frames are stretched out on their particular permit or application, that is the reason why.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just address that, since 2004, whenever there are any dramatic changes such as this, we do educate our members. We also bring in the agency. They provide the training and the updating as well. We do newsletter articles, and we work directly with our environmental committee, so most people are on the same page at that point.
Further questions from the committee? Seeing none, if you have nothing else for us, Katie, you're... Okay, thank you both. Appreciate it. Anyone else in the public who'd like to come up and speak? Shannon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson with Powder River Basin Resource Council. I think I'd just be remiss in not speaking to you today on behalf of a constituency that hasn't really been a part of the conversation yet, and that is citizens, the public interest, and private property landowners who are impacted by these mining operations. So I just encourage you, as you always do, to consider those voices as you craft policy and solutions for the state. So thank you.
Questions for Ms. Anderson? Seeing none, thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else in the public would like to speak? Sir? Please identify yourself.
Good morning. My name's Chris Fair. I'm environmental manager for Melgard Construction. Appreciate your time. This is my first opportunity to sit in front of you gentlemen and sit at this committee, so thank you. On behalf of Melgard Construction and a member of the Wyoming Contractors Association, we support that vision. We support the WMA, their vision, what Mr. Detai said, and support the Land Quality Division. The rules and regulations are in place. They do an excellent job. One thing we can rally behind there is the resources have been reduced. And from our perspective, Melgard, an area of improvement would be to reinvest in those resources. From 48 down to 41, meet in the middle, 45 people, where we can have those professionals in place so that these permits, these LMOs, these exemptions, whatever you want to refer to them as, can be processed timely. And the timeliness that we're seeing right now, we are in support of that. We think the system is working well. Furthermore, I want to make an open invitation on behalf of Melgard that if any of you gentlemen would so ever be in the Gillette area, in the Commerce County area, in our operational area in Johnson County, Commerce County, Campbell County, we'd love to take you out in the field to see how we go about, how we work with the regulation that is in place, how we work with the landowners that are in place. Furthermore, the relationships that need to be there to ensure that things are done right in their interests, in the interest of the state, in the interest of the business, in the interest of the people. One point that was brought up that I want to make note on was in regards to the guidance on the DEQ website. I have disagreement in the component that I do believe that it is user-friendly. Yes, it does take a technical mindset to oftentimes weed through and understand that. However, the guidance is there and it's readily available. One or two readings, it could be well interpreted as to what the guidance says. Furthermore, on the 6 proposals moving forward, I think Mr. Wentland and his team have provided an excellent opportunity to improve the process, and we look forward to what that may come to, how that may benefit the industry. I'm open to any questions.
Questions for Mr. Fair? Well, thank you for your time, Chris. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Further public comment on Land Quality Division in particular? Seeing none. Public comments closed. Back to the committee. Does anybody have any last-minute comments to make? I think that pretty much the last item was, I mentioned earlier, clarification of liens will be, with Tamara or Brian, would you guys put that on for next agenda? That'll be one of the items. Mr. Kaysen will be there at that time. Mr. Giese will be notified of it. So other than that, what else do we have? What we did ask was next meeting will be the 27th and 28th of August in Laramie, I believe. And you have that place assured. Do you know if we have anything lined up? Are we at the Rochelle Center or are we at the... Okay. All right. Well, anyway, put it on your calendars for the 27th, 28th in Laramie. We do have some work for LSO on public purpose investments. You're going to write a bill that will eliminate a couple, 3 that we think are not being used anymore. And the trust company statutes, you're going to rewrite those as suggested to include the latest changes. And then there's a couple, 3 of us. I think it's Representative Laux, Senator Rothfuss, and myself that will help you review and see if we can get it right this time, and then the committee can tear it apart afterwards. Okay. Anything else, Mr. Co-Chair?
No, I think you've got most of that covered. I'll I'll get with the co-chair here. We'll try to get a rough agenda put together. Next week is probably when I've got time to work on that for the August meeting, just so we can start working on that. Fits and starts, it seems like, to get that done. I think that's,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other topic which we didn't conclude and put legislation together on was the energy authority or entity. My understanding from the conversation yesterday is that we'll discuss that further, give it some additional thought, and potentially include that in the agenda. Is that the intent? So to continue to discuss next time?
That's correct. That should be added to the agenda too for next time. And if you, Brian or Tamara, if you guys want to put out something that we can review in the next week or so, as far as a temporary agenda or first draft, and then we'll go from there. Okay. Any other comments from the committee? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. I'm surprised you guys woke up long enough to do that.
The Senate has arrived.
Okay, we're off our oxygen now. Okay. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? No. Okay, other than Lindholm is excused and adjourned.